As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
So the recent explosive growth of cloud computing has definitely increased the volume and sensitivity of data, which is crossing these cables from military documents to scientific research. So anyone, by hacking into this management system, any malicious actor can disrupt the data flow and discover physical vulnerabilities, divert and disrupt the data traffic. So these threats are now in the recent days are translating into a form of warfare.
Aloha and welcome to Dialogue, where conversations shape security. It's a pleasure to have you with us for Dialogue 31, Indo-Pacific Underwater Competition. I'm your host, James Minnick, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. Today is our 5th annual webinar series with the Korea Institute for Maritime Strategy. As geopolitical tensions intensify in the Indo-Pacific, the spotlight often lands on surface level issues, and yet a critical arena for competition is hidden beneath the waves. This underwater contest is driven by military and economic interests, focused on securing underwater resources, bolstering submarine capabilities, and controlling key maritime routes. Submarine proliferation is a defining feature of this underwater rivalry. China's rapid modernization of its submarine fleet aims to safeguard its maritime claims and assert power across the region. In response, nations like India, Japan, Australia, and South Korea are expanding their own submarine forces to maintain a strategic equilibrium. These advanced vessels play a pivotal role in intelligence gathering, long-range strikes, and disruption of enemy operations, marking them as a crucial asset in this underwater power struggle. The Indo-Pacific is also home to an extensive network of submarine cables, the lifelines of global internet and financial systems. These cables carry vast quantities of data, are essential for economic stability and national security. However, they remain vulnerable to accidental damage and intentional sabotage. Recognizing this, many countries are investing heavily in surveillance and protection measures to secure these critical infrastructures. The seabed itself is a hotspot of competition. Rich in oil, gas, and rare earth minerals, it fuels territorial disputes and a race to exploit these resources. Countries like China, Vietnam, and the Philippines are frequently at odds over control, leading to increased investments in advanced underwater technologies for resource exploration and security. Rapid technological advancement is further intensifying this competition. Innovations like underwater drones, unmanned vehicles, and sophisticated sensors are transforming underwater surveillance, submarine detections, and maritime security. These advancements provide a decisive edge in intelligence and security operations in this intricate underwater domain. The implications of this underwater rivalry for regional and global security are profound, influencing not only the military balance, but also economic stability and regional cohesion. Access to resources and secure data channels is vital for prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. This multifaceted competition, with its blend of military posturing, infrastructure security, and resource extraction, underscores the critical nature of underwater security in the region. Today, we're privileged to delve into these complex issues with 5 experts from the region. Dr. Lukas Filler, professor at DKI APCSS, former naval aviator and expert in Chinese strategy. Rear Admiral retired Dr. Duk-ki Kim, vice president of the Korea Association of Military Studies, with expertise in maritime security, naval combat systems, and ballistic missile defense. Dr. Suk Kyoon Kim, professor at Hansa University, former commissioner of the Korea Coast Guard, and expert in maritime security and law enforcement. Divya Rai, research associate at Delhi Policy Group, specializing in Indo-Pacific maritime strategies and regional architectures. and Commander Seong-Jin Cho, researcher with the ROK Navy's Naval Future Innovation Research Group, specializing in maritime strategy and seabed warfare. Now, each speaker will present for 10 minutes, followed by a session addressing audience questions submitted during registration. So thank you for joining us, and let's dive into the intricacies of the Indo-Pacific Underwater Competition. To start, Dr. Lukas Filler will explore China's underwater ambitions, detailing its strategic aims and methods to secure influence across this critical domain. Lukas, welcome back to the dialogue. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so take us down this path. Help us understand Chinese strategy in this area.
Absolutely. So obviously there's a wealth of information, and this is an area where there's plenty of open source intelligence, if you will. There's quite a robust discussion in China. Of course, most of it is in context of the United States and United States capabilities. There has been a pretty sustained effort, especially for underwater, either autonomous or remotely piloted vessels since the 90s, not much different than the United States.
Okay.
One of the things sort of that I think is the overarching motivation for the CCP and the PLA is a sense that just like undersea domain in general, the United States is perceived to have a pretty decisive dominance in maritime domain awareness undersea, as well as things like undersea warfare. When you add into that the traditional Chinese hypersensitivity to threats, especially around its coastline, where over the last 150 years or so, especially in its perception and it's telling its own sort of story to itself, has been an area of particular vulnerability since the century of humiliation.
Yeah.
It is an area that China looks at with a desire for the A2AD, the anti-access area denial goal. One thing that I find interesting about this in a larger sense is that this has traditionally reflected China's land power views, where in the ancient times, it was much more concerned about its land borders. But even as its sort of attention has turned to the maritime domain, in part, not just because of its historical vulnerability, but also because its economy has shifted to the coasts, it looks at the East China Sea and the South China Sea from a very Mackinder view, meaning that it looks at it as a buffer zone. And so it wants to be able to extend that buffer zone as far out as it can. At the same time, as it's developed and its interests have expanded globally, it feels that, like many other countries, its conception of national security also expands geographically beyond the South and East China Sea. So one of the ways that China has traditionally looked at an asymmetric response to other countries or challenges where it is not quite as strong is to look for, again, sort of asymmetric advantages. One of those underwriting much of what China looks at in its security realm is information. And so the ability to have as much comprehensive, holistic, and detailed understanding of its maritime domain is a way of hopefully countering what it sees as the US's continued, although hopefully in its mind, narrowing margin of advantage in the undersea domain. It recognizes that, at least according to open source US assessments, even its top nuclear submarines are loud, and obviously it feels constrained or pinned in by perhaps the first island chain. And so it's looked at as sort of an integrated network of different sensors. Again, looking at the United States and the United States reported success in autonomous underwater vehicles, remotely piloted underwater vehicles, many of its sort of recent sort of developments, and they are accelerating, and China generally does feel that it's catching up quickly to the United States when it comes to underwater vehicles, not necessarily full-size submarines, but certainly the remote or unmanned ones. One of the things it is doing is copying very remarkably similar to designs of our, the US drones or underwater drones, including, of course, the Orca, which is probably, and the Manta Ray, which are some of the more interesting ones, one being quite large and multi-mission, the other one having a unique propulsion system that is generally believed by the US and by China to overcome some of the noise constraints of conventionally powered meaning propellers, not necessarily nuclear or diesel engines. And so it's developed a slew of different UAVs that have different capabilities. But what is very apparent is that its sort of area, its domain, geographical domain has rapidly expanded, continues to rapidly expand, as well as the capabilities ranging from, some of its undersea vessels can go down to 10,000 meters. Other ones have gone out for a month or more at a time. And they have been found even, as of a few years ago, some of the earlier iterations had been found close to the shores of Vietnam, Indonesia, and even multiple ones in the Indian Ocean. These are presumably, labeled for marine research, whether it's mapping of the seafloor or environmental and climate technology and research. But obviously, there's a lot of potential for dual-use technologies. There's been some discussion in Chinese open source news about even some of these being deployed in the Arctic, again, ostensibly for scientific research purposes. The other thing that I found pretty interesting is that there's a lot of talk about AI. And so the AI is being used not only to increase the capability for these to operate autonomously and to navigate efficiently, but also to create something of a web of sensors. And so another of the sort of large efforts that China is doing, a little bit more local than we're seeing with its undersea vessels, but still expanding, is what it would call its undersea Great Wall, what to some extent we call the Blue Water Information Network, which is sort of includes these undersea vehicles and includes sort of either data centers and control centers on some of the contested, disputed islands and reefs and features in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. They talk about it including ships as well as command centers on the mainland of the PRC. And a lot of these also include discussions of floating buoys that sort of are a mesh network, if you will. In fact, there was some recent news where China was overtly trying to incentivize its fishermen to detect other maritime sensors of any origin, didn't really matter, and should they see it to pick them up. And if you recall, a few years ago, this was a pretty interesting incident between the United States and China, where the US had a civilian unclassified autonomous underwater vehicle that was doing some, I think it was maritime research, scientific research, outside of any disputed area, if I recall, including outside of the 9-dash line. And China intercepted it, picked it up while the crew controlling it was within sight, and refused to give it back for at least a few days, if I recall correctly. And so really what the theme of this is that China is continuing to look at a holistic innovation strategy fueled by new information technologies. And that includes sort of new types of sonar, new types of other sensors, including putting magnetic anomaly detectors on their UUVs. They're putting in sort of underwater communication that they're trying to innovate different ways and talking about. I don't think it's been particularly successful in open source, but talking about incorporating quantum technology, quantum communication technology as ways to improve both the communications between all these data sensors, but also to include its own submarines. And then potentially there has been a discussion of China, similar to what the US did in the Cold War, laying large sort of fields of underwater stationary sensors in more sensitive areas where it could better detect other underwater activities.
Yeah, amazing. This has been a fantastic opening to what is a complex and yet perhaps less appreciated area of competition that's going on. Thank you for that and for setting us off in the right direction. Well, let's go ahead and head over to Rear Admiral Retired Dr. Duk-ki Kim, who will now give us a broad perspective on the Indo-Pacific's underwater competition. Over to you, Duk-ki.
I will cover from what is seabed warfare to how do the United States and the allies respond to PRC and Russia undersea threat. The definition of the seabed warfare is slightly different from the scholars. Nonetheless, I define that the seabed warfare is all operations conducted on the water and on the seabed to attack and protect seabed assets, including seabed pipelines, cables, and marine resources. Therefore, seabed warfare targets are as follows: seabed communication cables, seabed electric power cables, oil and gas pipelines, seabed natural resource extraction infrastructure, and military sensors and cables. This is the status of underwater communication cables worldwide. There are approximately around 300 types of underwater communication cables around the world, and the length is known to be 550,000 miles. The history of seabed warfare dates back to World War II. The importance of the seabed is being emphasized again as the Nord Stream gas pipelines, which connect from Russia to Germany via the Baltic Sea, was attacked in September 2022. The importance of seabed warfare has been highlighted again recently when the Houthi rebels attacked 4 of the 16 cables under the Red Sea. In recent years, seabed warfare has become the new form of hybrid warfare, along with cyber, space, and electronic warfare. The latest means of attacking undersea targets are as follows: divers, ROVs, special submarines, AUVs. This picture shows us that underwater environment situation. Recently, China has been promoting the Undersea Great Wall Plan in its coastal waters and the South China Sea. I will skip the details because Dr. Filler has already given us a presentation in detail. This photo shows us that China's large UUV, the so-called as SHU-001. Russia has also the world's most powerful seabed warfare capability. In particular, Russia has small submarines such as Palters optimized for seabed warfare. Moscow has also model submarines carrying small submarines optimized for seabed warfare. As we know, Poseidon nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed torpedo is the most dangerous threat to the United States, Korea, and Japan. This slide shows the characteristics of the Poseidon torpedo. Russia deployed a submarine armed with the Poseidon torpedo to the Pacific Fleet in 2019. Poseidon torpedo is deployed to Starovoi class SSK and Oscar class SSN. The following is an analysis of North Korea's ability to conduct underwater warfare, which poses a direct threat to the Korean Peninsula. Pyongyang is threatening South Korea by claiming that it tested successfully the nuclear torpedo with a nuclear warhead in the East Sea in last January. Therefore, if North Korea attacks South Korea's nuclear power plants near the coast, an important port such as Busan or various cables on the seabed, as shown in the slide, it will inevitably suffer fatal damage to the Korean economy. I would like to now offer my thoughts on how the United States and its allies and partners should respond to this underwater threat from China, Russia, and North Korea. First, the United States has a limited ability to conduct seabed warfare with only one ship, the Sea Wolf class, specialized for seabed warfare. The table shows the depths at which the United States can conduct seabed warfare in each area. For example, South China Sea operation depths average around 4,000 feet. This slide shows the seabed warfare capabilities of the United States airlines and partners, the United Kingdom, France, and Sweden. This is the analysis of the seabed warfare capability of Australia and South Korea. South Korea does not yet have seabed warfare capabilities. In particular, ROK Navy is focusing on its efforts on strengthening anti-submarine warfare and mine warfare capabilities to counter North Korea's submarine and seabed mine threat. Page 16 through 19 provide an analysis of what Indo-Pacific countries can do to improve their underwater maritime domain awareness in response to threats from China and Russia. Dr. Suk Kyoon Kim will present the underwater MDA. Later, I will skip these pages to save time. This slide shows the status of information fusion center worldwide. In Asia, Singapore is one of the famous information fusion center was already installed. Korea is considering installing an ion information fusion center to promote its Indo-Pacific strategy. This slide shows us that the current maritime security cooperation measures in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. There are divided three kinds of areas: law and regime, political institutional measures, military coast guard cooperation. In the slide, WPNS is a very important organization to improve regional maritime cooperation. They made a special agreement, also called as CUES, Code for Unplanned Encountered at Sea, to prevent any kind of incidental incident at the sea. This is my conclusion. The following efforts are needed to respond to the growing threats of seabed warfare from China, Russia, and North Korea. First, we need to develop means and methods to share various information that occurs on the water and the seabed. Second, the United States and its allies and partners must cooperate together to strengthen their abilities to conduct seabed warfare. Finally, we must continue to enforce China and Russia to comply with international law, norms, and regulations. I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you for that. Listening to you just brings into context the scope of the problem. You know, we sat down a year ago and did this, and just listening now at how much more advanced the threat is, or how much more we have to think about, is just inspiring as we have to consider our more comprehensive approach to this. Thanks for laying that out. We're going to go ahead and turn to Dr. Suk Kyoon Kim, who will discuss the Maritime Domain Awareness as he focuses on how the Indo-Pacific nations are enhancing surveillance to protect their maritime interests. Go ahead.
All right, the presentation is about the MDA capacity buildings in Northeast Asia, and I'm trying to identify what's at stake, the state's effort to build up their MDA capabilities. The MDA capability, the efforts are essentially related to the maritime dispute in Northeast Asia, which are increasingly becoming critical factors in international relations. They include claims to disputed island, maritime boundaries, and development of marine resources. And they are also challenged by the hybrid threat. These maritime threats are added by a particular situation on the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait crisis. So under the circumstances, the regional states are engaged in enhancing their maritime domain awareness capabilities to address these maritime threats. I will not get into the more details about the MDA concept because you already knows about it. It is defined by the US and the IMO, but in my definition, simply put, it is about a maritime intelligence framework to get to know about what is happening in the waters under the jurisdiction of a certain country. So anyhow, the concept of MDA has expanded around the world, and as I said, East Asian countries are actively engaged in bolstering their MDA capabilities. The Northeast Asian countries, including Korea, Japan, and China in particular, they are challenged by a wide range of maritime threats. And so they recognize the strong need to building up their MDA capabilities. They are advancing on the top of I would say the typical the MDA capabilities, including the AIS and the LIIT. They have engaged in developing the MDA organizations, restructuring maritime security governance, and the building of surveillance assets and infrastructure. Of course, it includes some part of the Seabed, the MDA capabilities. However, they are mainly focusing on the MDA on land. Japan is challenged with two overarching security threats, as you are well aware, from in North Korea and also the territorial dispute with China over the Senkaku Island. So Japan has made great effort to enhance the MDA capacities over the past 2 decades to deal with such a threat. Japan's maritime security policy and efforts are mainly based on their basic act on ocean policy and the basic plan on ocean policy. Under the act, Japan established headquarters for the ocean policy as a governmental governance to harmonize and coordinate the MDA efforts across the government department. So recently they formulated the basic plan under the former Kishida administration to seek to strengthen maritime security amid China's growing assertiveness. It's the aim to boost Japan Coast Guard capabilities and its cooperation with the self-defense force. And notably, it also aimed to develop the autonomous underwater vehicles and remotely operated robots. Since 2008, Japan has become a member of, the Japan Coast Guard has become a member of National Intelligence Community under Cabinet Intelligence and Research Office. Japan, in 2019, Japan created an internet-based maritime information integration platform called Umishiru, which is a ocean situation display system. It combines all the information and displays it on the map using a geographical information system. The Umishiru consists of 3 tiers, depending on the scope of availabilities. First one first tier is available to the public, and the second and the third are for the public purposes and which are not available to the public. The Korea, as you are well aware, the Korea is challenged by a wide range of maritime threats, ranging from the military threat from the North Korea to maritime dispute with neighboring countries. So under the circumstances, Korea also has developed various MDA systems using advanced IT and AI to monitor it and survey its jurisdictional waters. The Korea has engaged in the building MDA capacity to survey its waters for 24 hours a day using satellite, unmanned surface vessels, and underwater and aerial drones. The Korea engaged in building MDA capacity to survey its waters with the satellite and drones 24 hours a day. In this regard, Korea recently has launched a project to launch 53 satellites by 2035, which include 44 synthetic aperture radars and electro-optics for surveillance and one communication satellite and a satellite for search and rescue. So I'm from the Korea Coast Guard, so I would put the notable things they concern with the Korea Coast Guard. Korea Coast Guard established a coordination center, the KCG, the satellite center, to integrate the operation of satellites into the duties of KCG. I think it is very notable and very unique advancement with regard to the KCG's MDA capabilities. Finally, for China's MDA system can be said it is still evolving. However, China actively engaged in building up its MDA capability with the pursuit of maritime expansion to safeguard its core maritime interest. China's MDA data on sea positions are collected from 120 coastal AIS centers and China's ship reporting systems. China's MDA capability is mainly based on its own satellite navigation system called Beidou, which is China has independently developed and exclusively China-operated position, navigation, and timing service. Beidou consists of 49 operational satellites, and notably, China recently has doubled the number of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellite platforms in the past 4 years. And it's total satellite fleet numbering 260 platforms, which is the second only to the United States. China is expected to continue to launch a range of satellites that substantially enhanced its ISR capabilities. Dr. Filler just talked about China's underwater the surveillance system. China is also places a high emphasis on the advancement of underwater domain awareness systems in its littoral seas and around the South China Seas. China announced a project to build an underwater capabilities called Underwater Great Wall in the South China Sea. It aims to build a network of ships and underwater surface sensors capable of the real-time location tracking of surface and underwater targets. It is understood that the project is China's response to the South China Sea dispute and the U.S. freedom of navigation operations, as well as Japan's activation of coastal surveillance unit on the Yonaguni Island, which is very close to Senkaku Island. I already said that the Korea, I mean China and Japan are in dispute with over the Senkaku Island ownerships. The challenges and assessment. I would roughly just I would not get into more details due to the time constraints. And for Japan, the Japan is says to be that it has fully developed MDA governance at the national level, and is surpassed other regional countries in terms of the MDA capacity. And Japan also utilized the MDA as a strategy to expand its influence of the Southeast Asian countries. For Korea, I would say the Korea still lacks the recognition on the MDA concept, and so the Korea still lacks a unified MDA governance, and so the MDA activities are fragmented, and as a result, there is the silo effects. However, as I presented earlier, the Korea has recently enhanced the MDA capabilities, and it is projected to be highly enhanced when it fully implements its project to launch surveillance and search and rescue satellite by 2035. And Korea Coast Guard will be increasingly playing a leading role in the MDA. For China, China's MDA capabilities are still immature though, but I would say it has already achieved a relatively high level of MDA capabilities in the middle of a growing rivalry with the US and the regional countries, particularly in South China Sea and East China Sea. China is expected to possess highly advanced satellite, the surveillance capabilities in the framework of its counter-intervention strategy. We already know that which is the anti-access and the area denial. China is also expected to boast its radars and unmanned underwater vehicles and the unmanned aerial vehicles and the buoy-mounted maritime surveillance system. Finally, for my closing remarks, I would say the regional states of East Asia are sharing the sea lanes of communications. Also are threatened by the common challenges, which means we need to get together to address a common threat. For Korea particularly, I would say Korea still is suffering from the intense inter-agency competition among maritime enforcement agencies, and so Korea lacks a unified MDA governance. I think it is one of the main challenges to need to be addressed. On the emerging common challenges related to cooperation project, the critical underwater infrastructure, which is the main theme of our discussion today, I think, such as the submarine cables and the pipelines from the threat by the unmanned underwater vehicles or the unmanned surface vehicles. So under the circumstances, the Korea and Japan particularly need to enhance cooperation in sharing the maritime information and the maritime law enforcement between the two countries' Coast Guard and enhance their underwater MDA capabilities. Thank you for your attention. I would wrap up my presentation. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Kim, that was extremely insightful. So thank you for that comprehensive look. We're going to turn over to Divya Rai, who will address India's approach to securing submarine cables. And I will highlight that she has just written an outstanding chapter in a forthcoming book on this very topic. And so Divya, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinay. First of all, it's a very early morning in India. It's almost
Yes, it
6
is.
o'clock. So I want to thank the organizer for inviting me to be part of this very interesting panel. So I will be talking about safeguarding the submarine cables, and I will also address what are the vulnerabilities and measures that India can adapt in order to safeguard these very important infrastructure. So, while many of us are familiar with the word submarine and cables as a separate entities, but there is a very often lack of understanding and awareness regarding submarine cables as whole. So, to begin with, let's address a fundamental question: what exactly are submarine data cables, and why are they so crucial to us? So, submarine cables are primarily fiber optics cable that transmit telecommunication signals beneath the sea. They are designed to connect two or more landing points on land, allowing high speed of data transfer across the ocean. Surprisingly, you'll still find people who think that majority of the internet traffic and international communication moves via satellite, but that's actually less than 5% to our internet connectivity. To give you a brief idea, the entire global network of cables is more than 500,000 miles long, which comprises of more than 200 independent but interconnected systems, and they carry over 95% of the global communication, while the rest 5% is done via satellites. So that's the amount of world is entirely reliant on the submarine data cables for communication. And in terms of economic importance, in a single day, this network also processes somewhere around $10 trillion of financial transaction via the SWIFT system, which manages the global banking transaction. So the dependency on these cables is very significant, and damage to any cable around any part of the globe can have a far-reaching implication on any country. To give you an example, in back in 2008, there was an incident that happened in Mediterranean Sea. For India, any incident happening in Mediterranean Sea is not our primary or immediate concern. But the incident that happened over there, two submarine cables were cut, and that reduced the internet connectivity of Egypt to the world by 70% and India by 60%. Now think now think about the knock-on consequences for the business with so many services outsourced to India. Therefore, the functionalities of these cables have very high significant business and national security implication. Now, the primary question over here is how are these submarine cables protected around the globe? So at the moment, there are no single regulatory regime for the protection of these submarine cables. There are several regimes that exist at various level, at national as well as international. At the international level, the cables are protected under an international treaty, such as the first one is 1884, the International Convention of Protection of Subsea Cables. Then 1985 was 1958 was Geneva Convention for Continental Shelf and High Seas, and the latest one is 1982 UNCLOS. While at the national level, since the lead entities are often the national telecommunication authorities who are supervising the security of public communication networks and services, but the surveillance and protection and oversight of these depends on other entities. For instance, the surveillance by Coast Guard, maritime law enforcement, and police, or even for the fact that the Navy is involved in protection of these cables in the EEZ. But in the international water, particularly beyond the EEZ, the jurisdiction is more or less ambiguous, and it is not clear which country is responsible for surveillance as well as the protection of subsea cable. Talking about the submarine cables, what they could damage threats, cables, definitely nothing new. Damage to these cables were also seen during the World Wars, when Britain cut 5 German cables in the First World War, and in the Cold Wars, there were instances of wiretapping for eavesdropping were also noticed. But now the difference is due to the interconnectedness. Since the network has expanded a lot, and the network has also become interlinked with each other. So now the threats are even more severe. So these cables are facing two types of risk. One is a damage to the physical infrastructure, which is primarily due to the accidental damages and sometimes the potential deliberate sabotage. The other attack is done on the networking system. For example, the damage to the physical infrastructure now is becoming more and more common as there are various fishing activities happening in the ocean. At an estimate, about 100 to 150 cables are severed every year, and the vast majority is primarily due to the fishing equipment or anchors. But now the intentional harm has become a major problem as they could lead to severe disruption in communication network, financial market, and military operations. As the recent attacks on the undersea infrastructure in the Nord Stream pipeline, and then the four cables which were cut in the Red Sea during the Houthis attack has actually heightened the concern for the protection of these cables. With respect to the other threat on the networking management system, so the recent explosive growth of cloud computing has definitely increased the volume and sensitivity of data, which is crossing these cables from military documents to scientific research. So anyone, by hacking into this management system, any malicious actor can disrupt the data flow and discover physical vulnerabilities, divert and disrupt the data traffic. So these threats are now in the recent days are translating into a form of warfare. So there are several points that can be made here, but one common point being that every major global conflict has actually opened up some of the actors involved in cable cutting, as the countries are relying more and more on digital communication and infrastructure. A hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, sabotaging, and destroying undersea cables can actually become a very powerful tool for any adversaries. So there are reasons, the motivations to do this damage and to do this sabotage is mainly to disrupt the connectivity. Sometimes it's espionage on communication data through cable network management system, or tapping on the cables at the landing points. So primarily due to these reasons, countries have actually come to understand how important it is to secure these undersea cables. But so far, there haven't been enough efforts that can incorporate uh, countries to be part of it, one, and the efforts are very limited in terms of their effectiveness. Now, moving towards India. So, India is emerging as a crucial hub for submarine cable infrastructure, and that is contributing to countries' Digital India initiative. So, as reported by Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, by 2022, India had 17 international cable landing at 14 distinct cable landing stations across 5 cities. And reported by the same organization, India is expanding its global cable network. So, from March 2023 to 2024 of March, the same organization reported that the total number of internet subscriber in India grew by 8.3%, which saw an increase from 881 million to 954 million users. But the biggest problem with India at the moment is Indian legislation does not fully define submarine cable systems, which complicates the regulatory and oversight and enforcement part. And also the latest Telecommunication Act, which was released in 2023, and the others, they do not adequately address the modern complexities which are surrounding the submarine cable system. And one of the major vulnerabilities of any country is not possessing cable repair vessels. And India at the moment does not have any Indian flag owned or stationed domestically, or any vessels, cable vessels that can repair those disruption, those cables which are damaged. So this will result into potential delay in addressing the disruption. So we are potentially affected by all these vulnerabilities and the threats to the submarine cable system. But the biggest problem is with respect to the complexity of jurisdiction over the submarine cables, particularly in the international water, which necessitate that the cooperation is the utmost importance for enhancing security of these cables. A couple of measures that can be adopted would be one, increasing intelligence sharing among the countries. Second would be promoting national risk assessment of the cable project, developing national monitoring and repair capabilities, as these can be very expensive and very expensive activities, those repair cable vessels are very specialized technology and they're very expensive to have. So developing national monitoring and repair capacities and capabilities is something that countries can actually do. Then establishing a cable protection zone, which would ban certain types of anchoring and various fishing activities that are happening in the territorial sea or beyond. Then the most important aspect is we need to update the international law around the cables, and we need to establish treaties that would criminalize the foreign interference. And at the national level, the countries also need to adapt more robust legislation. A very good example of this would be what Australia and New Zealand has done so far with respect to the protection of these submarine cables at national level. So, for a long time, there has always been theory that the international laws and security norm does not apply to the cyberspace. And one of the fundamental principles around this was that actually cyberspace does not exist. But on contrary, it does exist in actual physical infrastructure. And if that infrastructure is physical, it must be located somewhere, and which means it must be in a state's territory. So norms like cross-border use of forces or sovereignty to this infrastructure can apply, or to least to know who can protect it or who can control it. But the problem with submarine cable is that they are essentially privately owned, and infrastructure, most of it is laid outside the national jurisdiction beyond the territorial sea. So normally for the ships, we have seen that there is an international system for the protection of seas and the high seas by flag state of registration. But at the moment, there are no such system that exists for the submarine cables. At best, we have the 1884 Paris Convention on submarine cables, but those were designed to deal with the age of wireless telegraphy. So I think the biggest problem that we can identify, if we can see clearly, is that we lack a sophisticated system for protecting and understanding the submarine cables in terms of international laws and security norms. So in conclusion, I want to sum it up by saying that the submarine cables have actually existed for more than 200 years. But the discussion surrounding the protection of these cables is relatively new. And as the countries are expanding their submarine cable infrastructure, the pressing question now is how will they respond to these threats and vulnerabilities facing these cables, and what are the aspects which are being emphasized in the discussion and what is being overlooked. Personally, I believe at this moment, much of the field is being missed or glossed over. Like Dr. Minik said in his opening remarks, that we are not paying adequate attention to what lies beneath the waves. So protecting these submarine cables is not only important for the economic stability, but is equally important for the national security and defense communication for each and every country. So therefore, it's indeed high time that we need to act very quickly. And with that, I'm done with my presentation. I'll look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Fascinating introduction of a very complicated issue that we're not paying near enough attention to. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and turn to Commander Seong-Jin Cho, who will be our concluding panelist. He'll discuss the seabed warfare tactics and technologies. Over to you, Commander Cho.
알로하. 안녕하십니까.
Aloha.
오늘 히레단에 대해서 발표하게 될 대한민국 해군의 수성진 중령입니다. 저는 해군 미래혁신연구단에서 작전능력 연구 담당으로 근무하고 있습니다. 먼저 이런 자리에 참석하게 되어 큰 영광이라 생각합니다. 오늘 시간이 많지 않기 때문에 해저전 대응 방안 위주로 발표하겠습니다.
Hello everyone, I'm Commander Cho Seong-Jin from Republic of Korea Navy, and I'm honored to be speaking today about the seabed warfare. I'm currently serving as an Operations Capability Research Officer at the Naval Future Innovation Research Group. Given the time constraints, I'll focus my presentation on countermeasures against seabed warfare.
보시는 것은 전 세계 해저 케이블 현황입니다. 전 세계 인터넷 통신량의 99%가 해저 케이블을 이용하고 있습니다. 또한 세계 인터넷 사용량은 매년 22에서 50% 증가하고 있어 해저 케이블 의존도는 점점 증가하고 있습니다.
As you can see in this visual, this is a global overview of submarine cables. Remarkably, 99% of the world's internet traffic relies on these submarine cables. Furthermore, with the global internet usage increasing by 22% to 50% annually, our dependence on submarine cables is continuously growing.
최근에는 OTT 서비스와 AI 기술 발전으로 네트워크 이용량은 급증하고 있으며 메타, 구글과 같은 기업들은 자체 해저 케이블망을 구설하고 있습니다.
Recent surges in network usage driven by OTT services and advancements in AI have prompted companies like Meta and Google to invest their own submarine cable networks.
해저 자산에 대한 위협은 이제 현실이 되었습니다. 2022년 노르트 스트림 파이프라인 폭파, 2023년 대만 마주섬 해저 케이블 결단, 2024년 후티 반군에 의한 홍해 해저 케이블 손상 사건이 발생하였습니다.
Threats to undersea assets have now become a reality. Incidents such as Nord Stream pipeline explosions in 2022, the cutting of submarine cables near Taiwan's Masu Island in 2023, and the damages to Red Sea submarine cables by the Houthi rebels in 2024 serve as stark reminders of these growing threats.
해저전에 대한 다양한 정의가 있습니다. 한국 대구는 해저전을 수중 및 해저에서 해저 파이프라인, 해저 케이블, 해저 자원 등 해저 자산을 공격하고 보호하기 위해 수행하는 대잠전과 기뢰전을 제외한 모든 작전으로 정의하고 있습니다.
The ROK Navy defines seabed warfare as all operations conducted in the subsea and subbed environments, excluding anti-submarine warfare and mine warfare aimed at attacking or protecting underwater assets such as subsea pipelines, submarine cables, and seabed resources.
해저전 대응 방안을 국제적, 국내적, 군사적 차원으로 구분하여 설명드리겠습니다.
To effectively address the challenges posed by seabed warfare, I will discuss countermeasures at three distinct levels. First, international cooperation. Second, domestic preparedness. Third, military capabilities.
국제적 대응 방안입니다.
First, international cooperation.
해저 케이블의 설치, 수리, 파손에 대한 손해는 여러 나라가 얽혀 있습니다. 따라서 해저 케이블 보호를 위한 국가 간 협의체를 구성해야 합니다.
Installation, repair, and damage of submarine cables affect multiple countries. Therefore, an international consortium should be formed to protect submarine cables.
2023년 5월 쿼드 국가들은 해저 케이블망 보호를 위한 협의체를 구성했습니다. 이 협의체의 목적은 쿼드 국가들의 전문 지식을 활용하여 인도太平洋에서의 해저 케이블 보호를 강화하는 것과 해저 케이블 분야에 중국의 영향력을 견제하는 것입니다.
In May 2023, the Quad countries established a partnership to protect submarine cable networks. The goal of this partnership is to strengthen the protection of submarine cables in the Indo-Pacific region by leveraging the expertise of Quad countries and to counter China's influence in the submarine cable sector.
한편 나토는 2024년 2월 나토 본부에 해저 파이프라인과 해저 케이블을 보호하기 위한 해저 기반 시설 협조실을 창설했습니다. 이는 각국의 군사와 민간 해저 산업계의 노력을 하나로 모으고 해저 인프라에 대한 위협을 공동으로 감지하고 대응하기 위함입니다.
Meanwhile, in February 2023, NATO established an undersea infrastructure coordination cell at NATO headquarters to protect subsea pipelines and cables. This aims to unite the efforts of military and civilian subsea industries of member countries and to jointly detect and respond to threats to undersea infrastructure.
또한 같은 해 7월에는 나토 연합해양사령부 내에 해저 인프라 보호를 위한 해양센터를 설립하기로 합의했습니다.
Furthermore, in July of the same year, NATO agreed to establish a maritime center within Allied Maritime Command, so-called MARCOM, to protect undersea infrastructure.
두 번째는 국가 간 유사시 케이블 수리 지원을 위한 협정을 체결하는 것입니다.
Secondly, we need to come up with international agreements for mutual assistance in repairing damaged cables during emergencies.
그 앞에 이전. 현재 케이블 수리는 구역별로 여러 나라가 컨소시엄을 구성하여 진행하고 있습니다. 하지만 이는 전적으로 인간 영역의 일로 적의 공격과 같은 유사시에 대응하기에는 한계가 있습니다. 따라서 유사시 적국의 케이블 수리를 각국의 케이블 수리를 지원하기 위한 국가 단위의 협약이 요구됩니다.
Currently, cable repair is often handled by regional consortia, which are primarily private sector initiatives. This approach has limitations in responding to hostile actions. Therefore, government-level agreements are necessary to support cable repair efforts during these crises.
이러한 국제사회와의 공동 대응은 해적 케이블을 위협하는 잠재적 적성국의 도발 행위를 억제하는 효과로 이어질 수도 있습니다.
Such international cooperation can serve as a deterrent against potential hostile actions that threaten submarine cables.
슬라이드 다음. 다음은 국내적 대응 방안입니다.
Next, domestic preparedness.
그대로 해저드는 해군이나 특정 조직 단독으로 대응하기 불가능합니다. 특성상 신속하게 알아차리거나 범인을 특정하기도 어렵고 파괴 행위에 대한 명확한 국제법 기준이 없어 군사적 대응도 어렵습니다. 해저 케이블의 신속한 복구를 위해서는 정보기관과 민간 기업과의 협력이 필수적입니다.
Seabed warfare cannot be addressed by the Navy or any single organization alone. Its covert nature makes it difficult to detect or attribute attacks promptly, and the lack of clear international legal standards for destructive acts hinders suitable military responses. To ensure swift restoration of submarine cables, collaboration between government agencies and private companies is essential.
해저전에서 해군의 능력은 여전히 중요하지만 효과적인 대응을 위해서는 정부 조직을 중심으로 관련 기관과 민간 산업계 간에 적극적 협력 체계를 구축하고 임무를 분담해야 합니다.
While naval capabilities remain crucial in addressing seabed warfare, effective countermeasures require a robust, collaborative framework involving government agencies, relevant organizations, and private sectors. Roles and responsibilities should be clearly defined within this structure.
다음. 유형국가 해저 케이블 시스템에 대한 정부의 투자가 요구됩니다. 민간업체는 오로지 시장 경제의 원리에 의해 움직입니다. 그러다 보니 최단 거리에 케이블을 설치하고 특정 유형국에 몰리게 됩니다. 지금 화면에서 보시는 것처럼 한국의 경우 해외로 나가는 해저 케이블은 특정 지역에 몰려 있습니다. 이는 매우 취약합니다. 정부의 지원이 반드시 필요합니다.
Governments must invest in both cable landing stations and submarine cable systems. Private companies driven solely by market forces tend to lay cables along the shortest routes and concentrate them in specific landing stations. As you can see on the screen, South Korea's outgoing submarine cables are concentrated in a few areas, making them highly vulnerable. Government support is essential.
해저 케이블에 대한 공격을 받으면 최우선적으로 고려해야 할 것은 최단 시간 내에 복구하는 것입니다. 해저 케이블은 각국 주요 통신 사업자들이 컨소시엄을 구성해 유지보수 사업자를 선정하기 때문에 고의적인 해저 케이블 공격 상황에서 적시적인 대응이 제한될 수 있으며 전면전이나 국지적 분쟁이 발생한 상황에서는 대응 자체가 어려울 수도 있습니다.
The top priority in this event of submarine cable attack is the quickest possible restoration. As submarine cables are typically maintained by a consortia of major telecommunications operators, timely responses to international attacks can be limited. Furthermore, in the event of a full-scale war or localized conflict, responding to such attacks may be extremely difficult.
미국에서 운용 중인 케이블 보안 함대는 좋은 해결 방안이 될 수 있습니다. 미국 교통부는 연간 $1,000만 규모로 계약을 체결하고 유사시에 대비하여 두 척의 해저 케이블 수리 선박을 지정하고 있습니다.
The cable security fleet operated by the United States could be a good model. The U.S. Department of Transportation has a $10 million annual contract designating 2 submarine cable repair vessels for emergency situations.
다음 슬라이드. 마지막으로 군사적 대응 방안입니다. 해저 케이블 훼손을 크게 수상 선박에 의한 것과 잠수 플랫폼에 의한 훼손으로 구분할 수 있습니다.
Finally, I would like to address military countermeasures. Damage to submarine cables can be broadly categorized into two types. First, those caused by surface vessels, and second, those caused by underwater platforms.
수상선박은 사고를 가장하며 해저 케이블 근처에 닻을 이용하여 훼손할 수 있습니다. 각국이 구축 중인 NDA 체계의 감시 범위에 해저 케이블도 포함하여 비정상적으로 해저 케이블 근처에 장기간 활동하는 수상선박을 감시해야 합니다.
Surface vessels can disguise their actions as accidents and use anchors to damage cables. Therefore, each country should include submarine cables within the surveillance scope of its Maritime Domain Awareness (MDA) systems to monitor surface vessels that linger near cables for unusually long time.
감시 플랫폼을 이용하면 보다 정밀한 공격이 가능하지만 장기간의 작업이 필요할 것입니다. 해저 케이블은 훼손에 대비하여 부설할 때 1000m 수심까지는 해저에 1에서 3m 정도 파묻습니다.
While underwater platforms can facilitate more precise attacks, these operations typically require a longer duration. To protect against damage, submarine cables are typically buried from 1 to 3 meters under the seabed at depths up to 1,000 meters.
해저 케이블을 공격하러 오는 잠수 플랫폼에 대해서는 대잠수함전과 기뢰 대항 작전의 방법을 동시에 사용해야 합니다. 해저 케이블이 집중되는 곳에 주기적인 대잠 순찰을 하고 해저 케이블을 수시로 해저에서 감시하여 이상 유무를 확인하는 작업이 필요합니다. 이러한 작업에는 오랫동안 해저에서 활동할 수 있는 대형 무인 잠수정이 적합할 것입니다.
To counter underwater platforms targeting submarine cables, a combination of anti-submarine warfare and mine countermeasures should be employed. To ensure the security of submarine cables, regular anti-submarine patrols are essential in areas where these cables are concentrated. Additionally, continuous underwater monitoring is required to detect any irregularities. Large unmanned underwater vehicles, LUVs, capable of extended underwater operations would be well suited for these surveillance missions.
지금까지 제 발표를 경청해 주셔서 감사합니다. 토익 시간을 통해 해저 등에 대한 여러분의 고견을 듣는 기회가 되길 기대합니다.
Thank you for your attention. I look forward to our discussion and hearing your valuable insights on seabed warfare.
Commander Cho, that was also extremely insightful. Thank you for that comprehensive overview. We have a plethora of audience questions. We will always receive more questions than we have time to be able to address. But we've taken a few, and we'll ask the panelists to briefly give responses to these questions. I'm going to go in the same order that we presented in. And so let me begin with Dr. Filler. And so, Lukas, no matter how overlapping this question is, you only spoke for a few minutes. Expand on what's being asked here. But this question is asking about the PLA Navy's underseas ambitions in the Indian Ocean specifically. And so based on your research, how would you characterize the strategic objectives of the PLA Navy in the underseas domain of the Indian Ocean region? And then follow on, what specific capabilities are they developing to achieve these objectives? Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certainly interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say about this. So, in general, again, it's seen as sort of an active defense, right? The idea being to have the ability to control and deny as necessary, but really ideally to condition other countries to defer to its strategic interests. And those are obviously geographic as well as in many other fields. And so the undersea domain, looking at the United States and others, is a good way to do that because it can be inherently unthreatening until it needs to be threatening because it is fairly low observation. And so the ability to sort of have free reign as China desires, and most importantly, to make sure that others cannot impose any kind of obstacles in China's way in the Indian Ocean, especially because so much trade as well as energy resources are really important there. And then for, what is it that I guess, what can they do? What kind of capabilities are they working on? Again, sort of as much of a inner network mesh domain awareness would be ideal. Anywhere where China sees a potential vulnerability is a place where it would love to have more control. So one example would be CPEC, right? The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which we know includes a lot of transportation, but there is a fairly ambitious plan by China to use that for, once again, bypassing what it calls the Malacca Dilemma for subsea cables, amongst other things. And so it is actively working with the countries between it all the way down to sort of Gwadar port to lay terrestrial cables as a way of providing some sustainability and diversity in its IT vulnerabilities.
Insightful as ever. Thank you. Okay, Admiral Kim, this next one's for you. Submarine, we're going to ask a question on submarines and geopolitical dynamics. So here's the question. To what extent do submarines influence the geopolitical landscape in the Indo-Pacific, and how is submarine proliferation affecting military balances in this region? Over to you.
I am very honored to have a very difficult question. In particular, submarine arms race in the Indo-Pacific is concentrated in Northeast Asia. I bring up my PowerPoint to make you understand easy.
Please.
As you can see on the slide, submarines are bringing great challenges to the new maritime security environment in Northeast Asia. First, we look at the submarine balance in the region. China has around 60 submarines. Russia has around 10 submarines in its Pacific fleet, and North Korea has around 70 submarines. In particular, China has 10 nuclear-powered submarines, including 6 SNS and 6 SSBNS. Beijing is replacing SSN and SSBN with new models. In particular, the Julang 3 SLBM, which is mounted on the tank-class SSBN currently under construction, has a range of around 13 kilometers and can attack the United States mainland. Recently, China has frequently invaded the sea of the Korean Peninsula by using submarines and UUVs. China also deployed 6 SSBNs from the North Sea Fleet Command to Hainan Island, as you can see on the left-hand below slide. Under the South Sea Fleet Command to prepare for the South China Sea conflict with the US. Meanwhile, Russia is deploying new nuclear-powered submarines to its Pacific Fleet at Vladivostok, as you can see on the slide. In particular, the Vorey-class SSBN is armed with the new Blava SLBM, which is a new threat to the Korean Peninsula. In addition, Russia deployed Saro-class conventional submarines and the Oscar-class SSN to the Pacific Fleet. They are armed with Poseidon torpedoes. And the Maritime Zircon hypersonic missiles recently deployed by Russia have a range of around 900 kilometers, operated in the Yashin class. The Seabed hypersonic missiles are the new game changer in Northeast Asia. On the balance, the current United States and Japan have already various means to cooperation to counter the threat from China, Russia, and North Korea. On balance, Korea and Japan should enhance continuously maritime cooperation to counter under threat from China, Russia, and North Korea. Thank you for your attention.
Very, very informative. Thank you for that. Let's go to Dr. Suk Kyoon Kim. This question's asking about enhancing MDA. So here's a question. What innovative approaches and technologies can Indo-Pacific nations employ to enhance their MDA and improve surveillance at their borders, particularly as we're talking about here in the underwater domain?
Thank you. We just mainly focused on the surface MDA, but the regional countries of East Asia just is likewise, as I said. So I would say that the regional countries are not ready or they're not capable of expanding their MDA capabilities to the underwater the domain capabilities. So as we discussed today, just we have witnessed the main threat is coming from the underwater, and so beyond it's the typical or traditional the MDA capabilities fostered by the surface vessels or the aircraft. We need to expand our capabilities to the underwater and invest more the resources to build up our capabilities, the monitoring or surveillancing or the having the data of the underwater threat, which is emerging and very increasingly becoming critical. So the one thing I can say is that I'm not the military expert and I'm from the Coast Guard, so my perspective is from the Coast Guard, the law enforcement or the operational vessels. Anyhow, we need to, I think, to address the emerging threat from the underwater. We need to build up our capabilities to monitor, and so we need to have employ the unmanned underwater drones and also the unmanned aerial vehicles and the sonars, and so it is mainly depends on the countries the capabilities and the willingness to dive into the underwater domains. So I think finally I would say that now the regional countries East Asia are their main concern is on surface MDA, and then they need to further expand to the underwater MDAs. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that sounds exactly right. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and go over to Divya Rai. Divya, this question is asking about India's role in submarine cable protection. So the question is, what specific measures is India taking to protect submarine cables in the Indo-Pacific? And what are the key challenges that India faces in securing this critical infrastructure?
Thank you, sir. So I think one of the biggest advantage to India is its strategic location in the Indian Ocean region. And that makes it a vital hub for submarine cables. It connects the Europe, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and West Asia. So India's role in protecting these submarine cables in the Indo-Pacific region is extremely crucial. And one of the key initiatives that India is part of is the Quad Partnership for Cable Connectivity and Resilience, which was launched in May 2022 at the summit's Leader Summit alongside USA, Japan, and Australia. And this initiative was aimed to enhance the undersea cable system, security, and resilience across the Indo-Pacific. And recognizing their role in global connectivity and as well as the economic growth. For India at the national level, one of the ways that India is trying to make changes or taking measures to protect these cables is they are promoting more private partnership to align public-private partnership to align its objective with its national security interests. It is also looking to integrate various advanced technologies for monitoring submarine cables, for example, deploying drones, then maritime patrol aircraft to enhance these surveillance capabilities, and also using the artificial intelligence with respect to the quicker response. And at the legislation, at the legal level, so India is now adopting one of the various recommendations which was made by the Telecom Regulatory of India, which recommended for a solid legislation which would enforce the Indian authorities to arrest, prosecute individuals and as well as entities that may damage or threaten the submarine cables. Then also they recommended to draw lessons from the Australian Telecommunication Acts, which was passed in 1997, and which should be used as one of the examples that all the countries can adopt at a national level to safeguard these submarine cables. While these steps are taken to enhance to protection of the submarine cables through various international collaborations such as Quad and legislative initiative at the national level, but it does face a substantial challenge with respect to the coordination of multiple efforts at multiple levels. At the moment, these initiatives that are announced, so far there has been very less work that has been done, especially with the Quad Cable Resilience Partnership. Apart from the announcement of there will be a cable center which will be established in Australia, nothing much has happened to it. I think there are various ways and various channels through which CORD can actually become a very important legislation with respect to enhancing these cable resilience, and especially for India, since its location is extremely crucial. They can because of because of the legislation that they can adopt at the national level, and India's location in the Indian Ocean is extremely vital to India. So if these cables project, these initiatives and the legislation are adopted in a effective manner, that can definitely, the results can be good in the future.
Divya, brilliant as always. Thank you. Let's go to this last question then to Commander Cho. We're going to ask about seabed warfare and emerging tech. The question is this: how are advancements in underwater drones and unmanned vehicles influencing tactics and strategies for establishing and maintaining control of the seabed?
수중을 포함한 해양에서의 무력 충돌에서 기술의 격차는 매우 큰 영향을 미칩니다. 시각으로 관측하기 어려운 해저에서의 충돌은 전략과 전술보다 기술력이 가장 큰 변수가 될 것입니다.
Technological disparity exerts a profound influence on armed conflicts in maritime environments, including underwater domains. Subsea confrontations where visual observation is limited are primarily determined by technological prowess rather than strategy or tactic.
개인적으로 잠수 지속 성능, 수중 통신, 수중 감시 센서, 고립된 수중에서의 자체 판단 능력 등이 중요한 기술이라고 생각되며, 현재 수중 기술에서 가장 앞서고 있는 곳은 중국입니다. 수중은 철저한 회색지대입니다. 국제적 규범을 통하지 않고 전쟁 시 승자 독식이 구현될 가능성이 높습니다.
I believe that crucial technologies in this context include extended underwater endurance, subsea communication, underwater surveillance sensors, and autonomous decision-making capabilities in isolated underwater environments. China is currently at the forefront of underwater technology development. The underwater domain remains a largely unregulated gray zone where international norms are often disregarded and the victor takes all in the event of conflicts.
Now, it has been actually a comprehensive look at this extremely important issue. And so I want to extend our sincere appreciation to today's panelists and look forward to welcoming them back to dialogue. In fact, I should make a special note to our co-host at Kim's. Again, this is our 5th annual webinar with them. Look forward to next year's as well. Thank you very much for helping pull this together. As we conclude today's episode, it's evident that the underwater domain in the Indo-Pacific is a new frontier of strategic competition. This complex interplay of technological advancement, geopolitical maneuvering, and resource competition demands our attention. We've heard from our esteemed experts about the challenges of maintaining maritime domain awareness, the escalating race for submarine dominance, the vulnerabilities of critical undersea infrastructure, and the evolving nature of seabed warfare. These conversations shape security. Join us on November 25th for Dialogue 32, Seoul between Moscow and Pyongyang, featuring Dr. Lami Kim, DKI APCSS professor and international security expert. From all of us at DKI APCSS, thank you for joining this important conversation. I'm James Minnick, and until we meet again, aloha oe. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.